The suitcase wheels thumped softly against the porch steps as I returned home at last. The Arizona sun had been kind, and the visit with my sister gave me the rest I didn't know I needed. But as I unlocked the front door, I felt the gentle relief of familiarity settle over me. My house smelled like lemon oil and old books, my kind of peace. Dorian had dropped Mango off earlier that morning, left a note on the counter. "He was great, Mom. Trina loved him. Hope you had fun." I set the carrier down near the window perch. Mango fluttered out, stretched his wings, and immediately began babbling. "Red box," he muttered. I smiled. "Missed your chatter, you little gossip." Then he tilted his head and said it clearly, too clearly. "Just put it in the red box. She's too old to notice." I paused. Where did you hear that I asked out loud, more to myself than to him? Mango squawked and flapped once. No cops, no risk, just the old lady. I stood frozen in the kitchen, one hand still on the coffee pot. Mango didn't repeat it again, just started preening feathers puffed up like nothing happened. My first thought was the television. Maybe Dorian left it on while Mango was nearby. Maybe a movie. Maybe a crime show. But Mango only mimics what he hears over and over. I walked through the house slowly that evening, glancing at everything I'd left behind a month ago. Nothing looked out of place, but suddenly everything felt just slightly off. The way the hallway closet door didn't quite shut. A small dent in the baseboard I didn't remember. Things too small to name, but loud in their presence. When I turned in for the night, Mango was already asleep, one leg tucked, head buried beneath his wing. But the words still rang in my ears sharp and unwelcome. The next morning, I baked banana bread. I needed to see my son. The banana bread was still warm when I stepped onto Dorian's porch. I hadn't called ahead. I told myself I wanted it to be a surprise, a small thank you gesture. But truthfully, I needed to see him to look him in the eye. He opened the door after the second knock. "Mom," he said, eyebrows lifting, "didn't know you were coming." "I figured you deserved something sweet after a month with Mango." I smiled, holding up the foil-wrapped loaf. He chuckled, stepping aside. "Well, he did wake us up at 6 every day." The house smelled faintly of incense. Not strong, just enough to mask something else. Trina didn't come out to say hello. He said she was napping. I didn't press. We sat in the living room. Dorian poured us both tea, but his hands never stopped fidgeting, rubbing his jeans, checking his phone screen, glancing toward the hallway. He talked quickly, like someone trying to outrun the silence. As I sipped, my eyes drifted toward the corner of the room. A new, safe, small gray bolted directly into the hardwood floor. I hadn't seen it before. "What's that?" I asked lightly. He looked over, then shrugged. "Oh, that. Just some camera gear. Trina's into photography now." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The safe didn't look like it belonged to someone storing camera lenses. I stayed 15 minutes. Long enough to be polite, not long enough to be suspicious. He walked me out, kissed my cheek, and thanked me again for the bread. But the entire time, his smile never touched his eyes. That night, back home, I let Mango out of his cage. He climbed to his perch, stretched his wings, then said clearly, "Wrap it in gift wrap. Tell her it's for Diane." I stood still, hands damp from the dishes. I didn't know anyone named Diane. I listened for more, but Mango just tilted his head and stared at me like he was waiting for something. I told myself I just needed to stay busy. Wipe a few shelves. Toss out some old papers. Cleaning was always how I kept the worry quiet. So I went upstairs to the attic, where the boxes of winter coats and unused photo frames had waited patiently for years. The light flickered when I pulled the chain. Dust hung in the air like a question I didn't want to answer. Near the back wall, where the floor dipped slightly, sat a red storage bin I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. I hadn't seen it when I packed for Arizona. It was taped shut. Not just once, but 3 times thick strips of duct tape across the lid, pressed down hard. I crouched beside it. My hands hesitated, fingertips grazing the tape. The plastic was warm from the heat trapped under the roof, but something about the bin felt cold. Wrong. I peeled the tape slowly, like opening a letter I knew I shouldn't read. Inside were neatly stacked packages. Rectangular, heavy-looking, wrapped tight in layers of plastic and brown paper. Each was marked with a number sharp black ink that looked too clean, too official. I didn't touch them. I just stared. Then, from behind me, Mango's voice floated up the stairs. He wasn't even in the attic, he was down below, but he was loud enough to hear, "That's the one. The red one." "She won't check it." I froze. My knees stiffened. I looked again at the bin, then at the narrow beam of sunlight on the attic floor. I didn't open the packages. I didn't need to. I closed the lid, sat down next to it, and pressed my back against the wooden beam behind me. My breathing slowed, but it didn't feel calm. It felt like something holding itself still, just long enough to survive. Downstairs, Mango went quiet. I stayed up there until the light began to fade, and when I finally stood, my legs ached from how long I'd been still. That night, I didn't sleep. The red box sat in my mind like a weight. I didn't want to guess anymore. I wanted to know. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the app that connected to my indoor security camera. I'd had the small unit installed 2 years ago after a rash of neighborhood break-ins, mostly to keep an eye on Mango when I traveled. I rarely looked at the footage, never had reason to. Until now. I scrolled back to the second week of my trip. There was a clip motion detected just after midnight. I tapped it open. The screen lit up with the grainy black and white of my living room. The back door eased open. Trina stepped inside, first moving quickly, glancing over her shoulder. Then Dorian. He locked the door behind him like he'd done it before. Each of them carried a duffel bag. They didn't speak. They moved in practiced silence, heading straight for the hallway toward the attic stairs. 2 nights later, they came again. Same bags. Same silence. Same door. I watched it all unfold with my hand pressed flat against the kitchen table. The red bin hadn't been there when I left. They had brought it. Placed it in my attic. In my house. That afternoon, I dusted around the cereal boxes in the pantry. Not because I needed to, but because Mango from his perch said, "Put it in the cereal box next time." He said it clearly, like it had been said to him more than once. That was the moment it shifted from suspicion to certainty. This wasn't just Dorian being careless or secretive. It wasn't leftover resentment from years we couldn't fix. This was calculated, intentional, and if the contents of that red box were what I feared, then they hadn't just used my house, they'd tried to make me part of it. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I sat in the living room with the lights off, just listening, for footsteps, for movement, for anything. But the only sound was Mango, whispering to himself in the dark. The next morning, Dorian called. Dorian called at 9:30 the next morning. Voice bright, warm, coated in a familiarity that made my chest tighten. "Morning? Mom, how's the bird treating you?" "He talks more than I remember," I said. He laughed too quickly. "Figures." Then came the real reason for the call, delivered casually, like an afterthought. "Hey, listen, would you mind doing me a tiny favor today? I'm drowning in errands. I've got this birthday package for a friend, Diane. If you're already heading into town, could you drop it off? It's on your side of the county." I said nothing for a beat too long. He filled the silence. "It's already boxed." Trina wrapped it. "Super easy, just a porch drop-off." There it was, packaged as helpfulness, seasoned with urgency, wrapped in obligation. Of course, I said gently. I can do that. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. Half an hour later, he stood at my porch, holding a glossy gift box tied with a silver ribbon. Pretty. Ordinary. The kind of thing no one questioned. The kind of thing no one opened. He didn't step inside. He didn't look me in the eye long. It's light, he said, handing it to me too carefully. Don't worry about it. Inside, Mango barked from the living room before the door even closed. That's the one. Just drop it off. She won't know. Dorian paused, brows raised. What did he just say? Oh, nothing, I said. Just Mango being Mango. I watched him drive away. Only when his car rounded the corner did I place the box on the passenger seat, not the back, not the trunk. Close enough to feel its weight as I drove. I didn't go to Diane's. I didn't even look up the address. I drove straight to the brick building on Timber Road with the state seal on the glass doors and the cameras in every corner. At the front desk, I set the gift box down gently. I need to speak to someone, I said. My voice didn't shake. The officer who met me noticed immediately that a woman my age only walks into a station carrying a gift box for one reason. By the time I sat down in the interview room, the ribbon had been cut, the lid lifted, and the truth exposed under sterile fluorescent light. If Dorian thought I was blind trusting or disposable, he had mistaken silence for ignorance. 2 days passed in a fog that tasted metallic. I didn't leave the house. I barely opened the curtains. I told myself it was exhaustion, but truthfully, I was waiting like you wait for a storm whose shape you already know, but still can't name. The call came at 8:17 a.m., Mrs. Granger. This is Detective Hall. We need you back at the station. There was no comfort in his voice. Only procedure. In the evidence room, the open gift box sat under harsh white lights. The ribbon and paper were tagged and bagged. The contents, small, dense bricks wrapped in industrial plastic, were logged with photographs and serial codes. Narcotics Hall said not unkindly, packaged for distribution. My throat went dry. And the sender, he slid a document across the table. My full name, address, and signature line, empty, but formatted like it had been prepared for me to sign. Printed beside it, neatly typed, from the desk of Odella Granger. My pulse thudded in my ears. We intercepted it early, he continued. But if this had reached a carrier point or mailing depot, you would currently be in federal custody. The room swayed, not from shock alone, but from the shape it took betrayal disguised as convenience. Hall cleared his throat softer now. There's something else you should know. Your son is already in our system. Not front-facing, not arrested, but flagged. He and his partner have been under watch in an ongoing distribution chain. I heard the words, but felt the silence between them more sharply. At home, Mango was waiting on his perch. Bright-eyed as ever, I spooned seeds into his bowl with hands that wouldn't settle. Then he said it again. Clear. Rehearsed. Just get her to sign it. Tell her it's vitamins. I exhaled, steadying myself against the counter. They weren't just using my home. They weren't just hiding evidence where I'd never look. They were preparing me, grooming me to take the fall. I locked the box I kept under my sink where spare keys and old warranties used to live. Now it held a different purpose. Tomorrow I'd open something far heavier than attic bins or gift wrap. And this time I wouldn't be uncovering their plan. I'd be handing them mine. Detective Hall didn't have to insist. I handed over the camera footage, the audio clips of Mango parroting commands, even the exact timestamps. Evidence doesn't argue. It speaks for itself. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. Mrs. Granger, you should stay with someone for a while. This could escalate. I thanked him. Politely. Then I drove home. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. That afternoon, 2 officers came by the house, plain clothes, just as Hall had promised. They didn't ask unnecessary questions. One carried a clipboard, the other carried gloves and a flat canvas bag. Their knock was soft, their voices lower than expected. I led them upstairs to the attic. The red bin was still there, undisturbed. I watched as they opened it, cataloged each item, labeled the packages. One of them found the flattened USPS envelope tucked near the beams. The other held up the forged courier badge, frowning at its bubbling edges. Then came the phone. Burner style, no password, no camouflage, just recklessness sitting there like it belonged. They said little, only confirming what would be logged and what would be tested. When they were done, they packed everything into evidence bags and nodded once. "Thank you for calling it in," one said. "You probably stopped something bigger than you realize." After they left, I changed every lock front back garage basement. Each click of the bolt sliding into place felt like reclaiming something small, but real. Mango was quiet downstairs, unusually so. He'd spent days mimicking commands and whispers that weren't meant for me. But now, with the attic cleared, the house seemed to breathe again. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch around me. Not fearful silence. Not the kind that hides. The kind that listens. Tomorrow the headlines might start. The paperwork. The names. But tonight I would sleep in a house that no longer held anyone else's secrets. The morning arrived with a kind of ordinary stillness that felt unnatural, like a photograph where no one is breathing. Detective Hall had given me the update the night before in clipped, careful language. The sting would happen at first light. The timing, the warrants, the routes, they'd already mapped it all. My only instruction was simple: don't be there. So I wasn't. I sat on my porch, wrapped in a pale sweater, hands folded around a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. The sun was still low, gentle, almost apologetic. My street looked as it always had. Trimmed hedges, a jogger with earbuds, wine chimes shifting in the breeze. Normalcy pretending it hadn't been housing secrets. At 6:42 a.m., the mail truck rattled down the road, stopping at each box with familiar patience. I watched it move like a pendulum of routine, comforting, predictable, innocent. Then the sirens began. Distant at first, a rising thread of urgency woven into the morning. No panic, no chaos, just purpose. I knew the moment the vehicles turned toward Dorian's street. The cadence changed, sharpened. Closer. No hesitation. No wandering route. I didn't need to see it to picture it. Cruisers boxing in both ends of the block. Trina stepping out first, mask of confidence dissolving too slowly to save her. Dorian realizing one heartbeat too late that escape requires planning, not arrogance. No bargaining, no clever lines, no loopholes. Just the weight of inevitability. I exhaled once quietly. Mango was inside awake, chattering nonsense into the quiet house. No warnings, no clarifications. Just noise because some truths had already finished speaking. A neighbor's curtain twitched across the street. No one stepped outside. People sense when a moment belongs to someone else. The sirens faded sooner than I expected, swallowed by distance, replaced again by the rustle of ordinary life. And in that quiet, I felt the strange ache of something unresolved. Not regret, not forgiveness, but the echo of a hope that stubbornly outlives betrayal, insisting on being felt anyway. By afternoon, I would have to walk inside, sit at my kitchen table and learn the story as it was written by evidence instead of possibility. But for now, I stayed on the porch, listening to the hush left behind. I sat in the same room where they'd first opened the box. Same dull walls, same sound of the ceiling vent humming overhead. But this time, I wasn't handing over evidence, I was giving my account. Detective Hall asked questions in a tone that tried to be gentle, but still carried the crispness of a report being formed. I answered plainly. I told him I'd noticed changes in Dorian's eyes in the house in the silence, but I hadn't suspected anything not truly until Mango spoke. "That's the turning point," Hall said, scribbling a note. "You're lucky, Mrs. Granger." I tilted my head. "I don't think it was luck." He looked up. "I think it was listening," I said. He nodded once, and the rest of the questions came easily. No tricks, no surprises. I had nothing to hide, and everything I said lined up with the timeline they'd already built, from the footage, the call logs, and the seized packages. When it was over, they offered to walk me to my car. I declined. Back at home, the house felt different. Not just cleared out, but quieter, in a way that finally felt mine again. I poured tea, then paused in the doorway listening to Mango rustle his feathers from the kitchen. "She's smarter than she looks," he said brightly. I almost laughed, but it came out as more of a breath. Just a soft shift in my face, a smile I hadn't allowed myself to feel in days. I walked over and scratched gently under his neck. He leaned into it, eyes closing, content. He had no idea what he'd done for me. Or maybe he did. The mail came at noon. A simple white envelope addressed by hand. I opened it with care, knowing before I read the first word that it was from Dorian. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, guilt trying to find its shape. I read the first line twice before setting it down. He wanted to talk. He wanted to explain. He wanted, finally, to be heard. But the thing was, I wasn't sure I needed to hear anything else. I cleared out the attic the next morning. Box by box, bag by bag, until only the wooden beams and faint smell of insulation remained. I opened the windows to let the old air out. The breeze that came in was cool and clean, like the house had finally exhaled. Mango didn't say a word. He watched from his perch in the kitchen, head tilted slightly, feathers smooth and still. For days he had mimicked plans and voices and lies. But now, with no one left to impress or warn, he had gone quiet. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, not out of routine, but because I could. The table was empty. No packages. No stacks of mail with unfamiliar handwriting. No nerves humming under my skin. Just tea, sunlight, and a paper folded neatly down the middle. Near the bottom of page 3, beneath a photo of a new crosswalk being installed downtown, I found the headline, "Local Couple Arrested in Drug Distribution Probe. Anonymous Tipster. Credited in Ongoing Investigation." No names. No photos. No mention of me. I read it once, then flipped the page. I didn't cut it out. I didn't need the proof. Some stories are cleaner when they stay unwritten. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. Not the kind that follows fear, but the kind you can live in without flinching. This was my home again. My air. My walls. My space. Not a passageway. Not a hiding place. Mango blinked slowly at me, as if weighing whether to speak. Then he turned, fluffed his feathers, and tucked his beak beneath his wing. There was nothing more to say. I thought back to the first time Dorian had asked to borrow my house, how casually I'd handed him the keys. No hesitation. No suspicion. Just a mother doing what mothers do. It had never occurred to me back then that I wasn't the person they were protecting. I was the one they thought no one would question, and that I've learned is exactly why they did.